This week we're looking at Matthew 11. Now, Matthew 11 has pivoted. Matthew 10, as you remember the last 3 weeks, has been talking to the disciples, what they're going to experience as they go forth, the hardships, the good things, the community they can build, the community they're leaving. Matthew 11 kind of shifts away from that and back to the people in the marketplace around him. And the first thing he does is he gives us a visual of children playing. Um, Children always play what the adults do. That's back from time immemorial. We always have children, especially mimicking the behavior of their same gender adults. And we have that right here in the reading of Matthew 11. Now, some is lost in context because the culture has changed in the last 2,000 years. But essentially, Jesus is looking at two groups of children in the marketplace, one a group of boys and one a group of girls. And the boys are saying, "We played the flute and you didn't come dance." The flute was played during wedding ceremonies, and it was the job of the men to dance and show celebration and represent the community in their celebration. The girls respond and say, "We sang our dirges and you didn't come sing." The dirges were something the women did. The women were responsible for the community celebration of funerals and death. And there were women who eventually would become a profession, women professional mourners who would go from funeral to funeral, and they would be the outpouring, the wailing and gnashing of teeth. That was their job as a social expression of the grief that the community felt, particularly the family. So we have boys and girls in the marketplace complaining that they're not playing with each other the games they want to play. And the children are absolutely entrenched in what they're doing. The boys want the girls to play wedding, and the girls want the boys to play funeral. Not happening. And then Jesus goes on to say, John the Baptist came and he didn't eat anything and he didn't drink anything, and you told him he was full of a devil. And then I come along and I eat and I drink and I'm merry, and you say that I'm full of something and I'm always wasting my time with sinners. The wisdom, he says, is there. You're just not looking for it. And it's so often we miss the point when something is presented for us. And this is particularly true for people who are have advocacy focus, who have agendas that they are wedded to. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I was telling you, pick your issue and focus on that. That the problem with only focusing on the one issue is that you often miss the bigger picture. And this is kind of what Jesus is saying with the folks today. I've had a lot of conversations this past week, one in particular, where I made an offhanded comment on a friend's media page, and it lit up by people intentionally missing my point. And I went back and explained, and they were not interested in my actual point because they were more concerned with their point. I just walked away at that point in time because I'm not going to be part of that kind of a conversation. But it was really interesting to watch as people, I have no idea who they are. I will never probably meet them. Were so bent on their point being the dominant one that they were talking over each other and missing completely what I was saying, which wasn't even really that much. It was just a casual comment to a friend on a post that he'd made. This is our society. We get caught up in things. We don't see the picture. And Jesus is calling us to stand back a little bit and look at the wisdom. Now remember, these are not the people who he has spent the last 3 years educating. Okay, so they are expected to be a little more with it. Jesus is now shifting to a new group of people who are just starting to follow him. And he says to them, look to the wisdom, because if you look to us, our behavior, as if somehow it's a litmus test, you're going to miss the point. And Jesus proceeds after that. We skip a few verses, and then we get to Jesus praying to God again and saying, God knows the Son knows God. We understand each other. And if people want to understand you, they have to understand me, because through me, they will understand you. And then Jesus turns to the rest of the people and says, come unto me, all you who need rest and heavy labor. You've all heard this at funerals and other places. This is a very common phrase of comfort. Jesus says, come to me, I give you rest, that my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Now I want to unpack that one a little bit. The word yoke is really kind of interesting. I found out last week, actually, that the word yoke in English is related to the word yoga in Hindu. Um, People who are much smarter about these things than I will ever be, have found a linguistic link between Indo languages and European languages. But think about that for a minute. Yoke and yoga are from the same base. Yoga, as we in the West understand it, which is arguably very, very limited, is more than just an exercise form. It's a process of prayer and meditation and using your body to find ways to relate to God. So Jesus is asking us to wear a yoke. Now, anybody who is associated with farms know that yokes are used to balance the burden. They were used on slaves as well, so it's not just about animals. They often were tandem, so they were two yoked together. And in an earlier point in the scriptures, not Matthew, but in the Hebrew scriptures, people are warned against pairing an oxen with a donkey because they're not equal to the burden they share. And that's what we mean by being unequally yoked. People need to be yoked, so working together, having the responsibility with people who are equal to them or can very quickly get up to speed. So the idea of yoke is about work, and it's about carrying burdens, and it's about sharing those burdens, possibly with a helper. And Jesus says that my yoke is going to be light. And he was talking particularly about the restrictions the Pharisees and the Sadducees were putting on the people at the time, and heavily burdened with expectations. Now, sometimes this is read as Judaism versus Christianity, that Christianity is lighter and Judaism is harsher. I want to stop that right there. That is not the point. In fact, that leads to a whole lot of anti-Semitic thinking, and that is not factual, and it's not what Jesus was talking about. Jesus was never not Jewish. He was always Jewish within his own Hebrew tradition. What he was talking about was those inside Judaism, which were, well, actually not even Judaism, because it didn't, as an identified religion, it didn't exist at the time. They were still people within the Hebrew culture. The Hebrew folks were as varied and different as they are today. And those who adhered strictly to what the Pharisees and the Sadducees wanted were burdened with more work at the temple, more expectations, more type of prayer, more payments perhaps. Little is known, but the idea is that the Pharisees kept judging and putting down their expectation on the people. Whereas Jesus comes along to the same people and says, all of this work they're asking you to do is not necessary to be part of God's world. You don't have to have that burden on you. You don't have to have the burden that, quite frankly, the Christian church puts on people nowadays and has for many centuries. You don't have to have the burden of always saying the right thing. You don't have to have the burden of being in clean clothes when you go to worship. You don't have to have the burden of staying in a marriage that is destroying you just because you were married in the church. You don't have to have the burden of taking people's flack and bad-mouthing you simply because they're more respected in the church community than you are. We don't have to have those burdens, because God's choice in giving us responsibility is not heavy to carry. And again, it goes back to what Jesus has told people that faith is all about, and about God's love is all about. It's about love your neighbor, love yourself, and love God. Those three aren't in particular order. They're all meant to be together in one grouping. This is the yoke that we have. It is very light. We don't need to measure up to world situations. We don't need to be those children in the marketplace arguing, this is how I do things. Why aren't you coming and doing things my way? Jesus said wisdom will be appearing if you stand back and look for it. That God will be known through me if you want to get to know me. Very, very simple stuff. Again, not talking to the disciples who have spent years working with him, but this is him evangelizing and talking to new communities and telling them new things that they can experience. Being a Christian is not an arduous thing. It's a responsible thing. We are given a certain set of things that we have to do, but it's not burdensome to us as people to come before God. We don't have to be good enough. We already are. We don't have to shuck every bad behavior we have before we can sit at the foot of God. God has already forgiven us that. We have this ritual of confession and repentance that we go through every week and hopefully every day to get us in a place where we can be open to God, but God is never closed off to us. This is something that we do. Years ago, before Eucharist happened in communion in a lot of Protestant churches, the elders would go around and give out these little coins, and they would judge whether or not someone was worthy of coming to the Lord's table. That's humans judging humans, and that is not what this is about. God never asked us to police each other. God only told us we were all welcome. We were all open to having it. All we had to do was look to Jesus and follow what he had to say. It's really kind of basic. Love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. Often that's the part that gets lost. Love who you are. The yoke you have as a person of faith is something you can carry. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling too burdensome, if you're feeling not good enough to come before the presence of Jesus, that is not God's yoke on you. That is society's yoke on you. Shuck that thing. You don't need it. All God's asked you to do is come open to the wisdom. Come looking at Jesus' life. Come finding out who God is. God's yoke is light and the burden is easy. You just have to be willing to go, because God's not going to put it on you if you're not open to taking it. That's the other thing. This is about you. You make this choice. The yoke is light and the burden is small. And if you need rest, come, because Jesus is there, creating a place where you can just exhale and relax into the love that you've been guaranteed from birth.